Well, we're going to talk about the willingness to die, to be a martyr. So I think it's an important understanding, but we're also going to get into the complexities of self control. Stop blaming your desire, stop blaming demons, stop blaming Satan. It's your lack of self control that leads you to do things against God's will. It's not your sinful nature, which doesn't exist. It's not the inward dwelling sinful desire as the Jews teach. You have the ability to do what's right. We're going to start in 2nd Maccabees chapter 6. Not longer after this, the king sent an Athenian senator to compel the Jews to forsake the Torah of their fathers and cease to live by the Torah of God. It's interesting because this is the New Testament. The New Testament and the early Christians teach us to forsake the Torah. So Ignatius of Antioch, let's start with his epistle to the Magnesians. Chapter 7, do nothing without the bishops and the presbyters. And therefore the Lord did nothing without the Father, being united to him, neither by himself nor by the apostles, so neither do anything without the bishop and presbyters. You see this, there's already this clear elevation of the bishop to being like God. Neither endeavor that anything appear reasonable and proper to yourselves apart, but being come together into the same place, let there be one prayer, one supplication, one mind, one hope, in love and joy undefiled. There is one Yeshu, Christa, in whom there is nothing more excellent. Therefore run together as it is one temple of God, as to one altar, as to one Yeshu, who came forth from one Father, and is with and has gone to one. So check this out. Caution against false doctrines. Do not be deceived by strange doctrines, nor with old fables, which are unprofitable. For if we live according to the Jewish law, is that where it came from? From the Jews? We acknowledge that we have not received grace, for the divinest prophets lived according to Yeshu. False. They didn't. On this account, also they were being persecuted. False, and we'll get into that. Being inspired by his grace to fully convince the unbelieving that there is one God, and he has manifested himself by Yeshu, his Son, who is the eternal Word, not proceeding forth from silence, who is in all things pleased with him. So check out chapter 10 here, in chapter 9. So let's do chapter 9 first, because this is important, because it makes it clear he's not talking about the Talmud. If therefore those who were brought up in the ancient order of things have come to the possession of a new hope, no longer observing the Sabbath. It's not Talmud. So let's go back to 2nd Maccabees, because the Talmud actually tells Gentiles they cannot observe the Sabbath as well. And also to pollute the temple in Jerusalem, and call it the temple of Olympian Zeus, and it call the one Garazim the temple of Zeus, a friend of strangers, as did the people who dwelt in that place. Harsh and utter grievance were the was the onslaught of evil, for the temple was filled with the debauchery and reveling by the Gentiles, who dallied with harlots, had intercourse with women within the sacred precincts, and besides brought in things for sacrifice that were unfit. The altar was covered with the abominable offerings which were forbidden by the Torah. A man could neither keep the Sabbath, well, that is that interesting, nor observe the feast of his fathers, nor so much as confess himself to be a Jew. On the monthly celebration of the king's birthday, the Jews were taken under bitter constraint to partake of the sacrifices. And when the feast of Dionysus came, and who is Yeshu, but another shadow of Dionysus, They were compelled to walk in the procession in honor of Dionysus, wearing wreaths of ivy. At the suggestion of Ptolemy, a decree was issued to the neighboring Greek cities that they should adopt the same policy toward the Jews and make them partake of the sacrifices, and should slay those who did not choose to change over the Greek customs. This is the same thing the Christian church did for millennia. One could see, therefore, the misery that had come upon them. For example, 2 women were brought in for having circumcised their children. These women have publicly paraded about the city with their babies hung from their breasts, then hurled them down headlong from the wall. Others who had assembled in the caves nearby to observe the 7th day secretly were betrayed to Philip and were all burned together because their piety kept them from defending themselves in view of their regard for the most holy day. Providential significance of the persecution. Now I urge those who read this book not to be depressed by such calamities, but to recognize that these punishments were designed not to destroy, but to discipline our people. In fact, let not the impious alone for long, but to punish them immediately is a sign of great kindness. For in the case of the other nations, the Lord waits patiently to punish them until they have reached their full measure of their sins. But he does not deal in this way with us, in order that he may not take vengeance on us afterward when our sin has reached their height. Therefore he may never withdraw his mercy from us, though he disciplines us with calamities. He does not forsake his own people. Let what we have said serve as a reminder. We must go on briefly with our story. Eleazar, one of the scribes in a high position, a man now advanced in age and of noble presence, was being forced to open his mouth to eat swine's flesh. This is so interesting, given, what the New Testament teaches and what Christianity teaches, that, the Mark 7 diatribe. And he said, are you lacking understanding in this way as well? Do not perceive that whatever goes into the man from outside the mouth can defile him. So, here Eleazar is refusing to put swine in his mouth because he knows it will defile him. And yet Yeshu says that what goes in your mouth cannot defile you. Did Eleazar not get this memo? And look at the next verse. This is because it does not go into his heart, but it goes into his stomach and goes into the sewer. Thus he declared all foods clean. And I know there's controversy over this because the Messianics believe this is not the point. But, he says right here clearly that, what goes into your mouth cannot defile you. And this is why, he tells you that you must eat his flesh and drink his blood, which is an act of defilement. But even deeper, Christians have used this to justify that all foods are clean. Like 1 Timothy 4. Who forbid marriage and advocate abstaining from foods which God created to be shared in thanksgiving. So who teaches to abstain from certain foods? Those trying to follow the Torah. They tell you that, you can't eat pig, you can't have shrimp, because God has declared these are not food. And this is how the Messianics interpret this. Well, he's talking about other things. What else would you be abstaining from? You'd be abstaining from things that are not food. So whoever wrote this was like Ignatius telling you that, all foods are clean now. Don't worry about it. And this is also interesting. In Acts 21, we see Paul charged with what? And when they heard it, they began to glorify God. And they said, you see, brother, how many thousands there are among the Jews who have believed, and they are zealous for the law, the Torah, and they have been told about you that you are teaching all the Jews, and this is important, teaching all the Jews who are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, the Torah, and telling them not to circumcise their children nor to walk according to the customs. Paul is doing what the Greeks did in the Maccabees. You say, well, no, he's not. He taught the law. Like, okay. Behold, I, Paul, say to you that if you receive circumcision, the Christos, it will be of no benefit to you. Oh, there you go. He taught against circumcision. Clear as day. And I testify again, every man who receives the circumcision, that he is under obligation to keep the whole Torah. Yeah, no doubt, Paul. We are under that obligation. That's why we are obligated to follow that if you want to keep the Passover. So check out Philippians 3. Finally, my brothers, rejoice in the Lord. To write the same things, again, is no trouble to me, and it is a safeguard for you. Beware of dogs, beware of evil workers, beware of the mutilation. And yes, this is the word he uses. For we are the circumcision. How are you the circumcision, Paul? You don't teach physical circumcision. Who worship in the Spirit of God and boast in the idol and put no confidence in the flesh. Is this, something that the prophets taught? No. This is why, Ignatius is also wrong. Ezekiel 44:7. When you brought in foreigners, the Gentiles, uncircumcised in heart and uncircumcised in flesh, to be in my sanctuary, to profane it, even my house, when you brought near my food and the fat of the blood. So they made my covenant void, and this in addition to all your abominations. And you have not kept the responsibility of my holy things yourselves, but you set foreigners as keepers of the responsibility given by me for my sanctuary. And this is what you see happening in the Maccabees and in Acts. Thus says Lord Yahweh, no foreigner, uncircumcised in heart and uncircumcised in flesh, all of the foreigners who are among the sons of Israel shall enter my sanctuary. Both matter. And this is so important to understand for those of you who are still locked in the Platonic faith of Christianity. Both matter. Your flesh is part of who God made you to be. Your flesh is made in a way that you can obey your spirit. You see, if you're not willing to obey in the flesh of the law, then how would you obey the spirit of the law? And going back to Acts 21, we're first going to go read this a little bit more. 2 Maccabees again. But he, welcoming death rather than honor, rather than life, but pollution, went up to the rack of his own accord, spitting out the flesh. So this is where we're going to go next. Why did Eleazar die? He was willing to keep the Torah. As men ought to go, who have courage to refuse things that is not right to taste, even for the natural love of life. Those who were in charge of that unlawful sacrifice took the man aside because of their long acquaintance with him, and privately urged him to bring meat of his own providing, proper for him to use, and pretend that he was eating the flesh of the sacrificial meal, which had been commanded by the king. And this is so interesting. You drink your wine and you call it blood. The Catholics actually believe it is blood. But what is he saying? You could bring grape juice and just say because that's clean. It's okay to drink grape juice. And, we'll say you're drinking blood. It's the same thing. Here, he was unwilling to eat what was considered clean. Have a chicken breast that kind of looks like a pig, right? Eat the chicken breast, and then we'll say you're eating pig. Drink the wine, and we'll say it's blood. It's the same thing. It's unclean. And, Eleazar recognized this. So that by doing this, they might be saved from death, and he'd be treated kindly on account of this old friendship with them, but making a high resolve worthy of his years, and the dignity of his old age, and the gray hairs which he had reached, with distinction, his excellent life even from childhood, and moreover, according to the holy God-given law, he declared himself quickly, telling them to send him to Sheol. Such a pretense is not worthy of our time of life, he said, lest many of the young should suppose that Eleazar, in his 90th year, has gone over to an alien religion, and through my pretense, for the sake of living a brief moment longer, they should be led to astray because of me, while I defile and disgrace my old age. For even if for a present, I should avoid the punishment of men, yet whether I live or die, I shall not escape the hands of the Almighty. Therefore, by manfully giving up my life now, I will show myself worthy of my old age, and leave to the young a noble example of how to die a good death, willingly and nobly, for the revered and holy laws. And when he had said this, he went at once to the rack. And those who a little before had acted toward him with good will now changed to ill will, because the words he had uttered were, in the opinion, sheer madness. When he was about to die under the blows, he groaned aloud and said, "It is clear to the Lord in his holy knowledge that though might have been saved from death, I am enduring terrible sufferings in my body under this beating. But in my soul I am glad to suffer these things, because I fear him." So in this way he died, leaving in his death an example of nobility and a memorial of courage, not only to the young, but a great body of this nation. And then we have in chapter 7 of 2 Maccabees the martyrdom of the 7 brothers, that these 7 brothers were willing to die also after seeing Eleazar's example and not forsake the laws. But at the end of this chapter, is it this one? No, it's chapter 12. So let's go forward a bit, and we'll go to the next book. In 2 Maccabees chapter 12, on the next day, as by the time that had become necessary, Judas and his men went to take up the bodies of the fallen and to bring them back to lie with their kinsmen in the sepulchres of their fathers. Then under the tunic of every one of the dead, they found the sacred tokens of the idols of Jamnia, which the laws forbid the Jews to wear. And these are people that have died, Jews that have died. They died wearing idols. And it became clear to all that this was why they had fallen. So they all blessed the way of the Lord, the righteous judge, who reveals things that are hidden. And they turned to prayer, beseeching that the sin which had been committed might be wholly blotted out. And they're praying for the sins of these dead people to be forgiven. This is a sin in itself. You're not allowed to do that. For they had seen with their own eyes what had happened because of the sin of those who had fallen. And they also took up a collection, man by man, to the amount of 2,000 drachmas of silver, and sent it to Jerusalem to provide for a sin offering. And in doing this, he acted very well and honorably, taking account of the resurrection. For if he were not expecting that those who had fallen would rise again, it would have been superfluous and foolish to pray for the dead. But he was looking to the splendid reward that is laid up for all those who fall asleep in godliness. It was a holy and pious thought, and therefore he made atonement for the dead, and that they might be delivered from their sin. He made atonement for the dead. And this is where Christianity is formed from, and this is why you won't find 2 Maccabees in a Protestant Bible. The Jews and their neighbors. So Ptolemy decreed that all Jews be arrested. Where was I at? There was something I wanted to read in here. I don't remember what. I don't remember what I was going to read from 3rd Maccabees. 4th Maccabees has an interesting point about the law that I wanted to read, though. I'm about to prove the most important philosophical principle. Godly thinking is supreme over emotions and desires. 100% agree. You see, Jeremiah also says you can't trust your heart. And the New Testament tells you, trust your emotions, trust your testimony, trust your heart, trust experience. I would be giving you good advice then to pay close attention to philosophy. And this is where it goes off the rails. Pay close attention to the Torah, not philosophy. The Hellenization of the Torah is just, it's part of why you have the New Testament. This principle is essential for knowing what to do in every situation. It also includes the praise of the highest moral trait. And I'm talking about good judgment. Therefore, if clear thinking is shown to control the emotions that prevent self-control, such a tendency to overeat and rampant desire, then it's clear that it also rules the emotions that prevent us from acting in such a way, such as ill will, and these emotions that prevent us from acting with courage, such as anger, fear, and pain. Perhaps some people would object, if clear thinking can control emotions, why doesn't it do away with memory loss and ignorance? But that's ridiculous. The mind doesn't have control over such things, but it controls the emotions and desires that resist justice, courage, and self-control. And it does this so that we don't surrender to the emotions, not in order to destroy them. I could show you that their clear thinking had power over emotions and desires in a number of ways. However, I can do this best by showing you the heroic courage of those who died to preserve their moral character, Eleazar, the 7 brothers, and their mother. By ignoring their pain to the point of death, all of these persons showed that clear thinking had complete control over their emotions. On the anniversary of these events, it is appropriate to me to praise the moral achievements of those who died along with their mother to preserve their virtuous character. I would also call them fortunate because of the honor in which they are held. All people, including the ones who tortured them, were amazed at their courage and patient endurance. And what's more, they caused the defeat of the tyranny that oppressed their nation. They conquered the tyrant by their endurance. As a result, their homeland was purged of its filth through their actions. I will say more about this shortly. First, I will begin with my main point, and it's that my custom, and that when I will return, giving glory to God who possesses all wisdom. So let's skip ahead a bit here. Consider first the way in which clear thinking shows that it is supreme over the emotions through the exercise of self-control. Self-control means having control over your desires. Some desires come from the inner person, others come from the body. Clear thinking obviously has control over both. Otherwise, how is it that when we are attracted by foods that we are not allowed to eat, we can walk away from the pleasures that we would get from them? Isn't it because clear thinking is in control over our desires? I think so. We keep our distance when we crave any of the foods that are forbidden to us by the law, whether it is, say, seafood, birds, animals, or anything else, because of the self-control that comes from clear thinking. The sensible mind curbs the drives of the appetite, keeping them in check, and clear thinking silences the impulses of our body. This is much more apparent, the walk that God wants for you, self-control. The New Testament teaches you to walk in the Spirit, disobey the laws of God. You don't need to keep the Sabbath. You don't need to eat clean foods. And I know the Messianics and the Paul deniers, they believe you have to keep those things, but they still don't teach the principle of what Torah is about, self-control. Chapter 2. So why is it surprising when the soul's desire to join with something beautiful is defeated? Joseph, an example of self-control, is praised for this very thing. He had full control over his sexual desire through mental effort. Although he was a young man in his sexual prime, he defeated his sexual urges with clear thinking. Clear thinking isn't just being able to have control over sexual urges, but over every other desire as well. And so the Torah says, you shall not desire your neighbor's wife or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Since the Torah commanded us not to desire, I should be able to convince you even more that the clear thinking is able to control desires. This is also proves true in the case of emotions that prevent justice. It is obvious that clear thinking is in charge of the emotions Otherwise, how could someone who always indulges in binge eating in private, or a person who tends to overeat, or a person who tends to get drunk, learn a better way? As soon as people who have loved money decide to live according to the Torah, they are forced to change their way of life, lending to those who ask without charging interest and canceling all the debts in the seventh year. If people are greedy, they are forced by the Torah through clear thinking, so they don't pick up the grain in the field that they missed the first time, or go back through the vineyard to pick the last cluster of grapes. In every other matter, we can see that clear thinking controls the emotions. The Torah even controls affection for parents, so that a person does not desert moral values because of them. It exercises control over a husband's love for his wife so that he corrects her if she ignores the Torah. It rules love for children by punishing them when they do wrong. It comes before the affection for friends, and it challenges them if they are doing evil. Don't think it's strange that clear thinking should have control over hatred between enemies. Because of the Torah, we don't cut down an enemy's orchard in war, but instead we try to keep an enemy's property safe from destruction and help rebuild what has fallen down. Clear thinking even keeps more violent emotions in check, like the thirst for power, desire for glory, pride, self-importance, and jealousy. The sensible mind rejects these destructive emotions along with anger because it rules over the emotions as well. When Moses was angry at Dathan and Abiram, he didn't act against them in anger. Instead, he controlled his anger with clear thinking. The sensible mind, as I have said, is able to get the upper hand over the emotions, transforming some and defeating others. If this were not the case, why did Jacob, our wise ancestor, denounce the households of Simeon and Levi for the unreasonable killing of the whole nation of Shechem, saying their anger is cursed? If clear thinking couldn't control anger, he wouldn't have said this. When God formed human beings, God planted emotions and character traits inside them. At that time, God also set the mind on the throne in the middle of the senses to function as a holy governor over them all. And God gave the Torah to the mind. Whoever lives in the line with the Torah will rule over a kingdom that is self-controlled, just, good, and courageous. I don't tend to like all of the Proverbs, but this one really struck a chord with me. Proverbs 25:28. Like a city that is broken into and without a wall is a man without restraint. What is restraint? Self-control. You see, you look at what it also says. You have restraint over his spirit. You walk in the spirit, right? No, you need to have self-control, restraint over that spirit. Otherwise, it will lead you to idolatry, to lusts after things you should not. And then what do? You do what Paul does. Instead of practicing self-control, you beat your body. 1 Corinthians 9. But I discipline, which is the word literally to bruise my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified. So he did not have self-control when he had these desires to do what was against God's law. He would beat his body. So this is so important to understand. Self-control, it comes from respecting God. Let's go to another one. Psalm 36. Transgression declares to the ungodly within his heart, there is no dread of God before his eyes. For it flatters him in his eyes, for one to discover his iniquity and hate it. The words of his mouth are wickedness and deceit. He has ceased consider to do good. He devises wickedness upon his bed. He sets himself on a path that is not good. He does not despise evil. Your loving kindness, O Yahweh, is in the heavens. Your faithfulness reaches to the skies. Your righteousness is like the mountain of God. Your judgments are like the great deep. O Yahweh, you save man and beast. How precious is your loving kindness, O God. And the sons of men take refuge in the shadow of your wings. They are satisfied from the richness of your house, and you give them the drink of your river and your delights. For with you is the fountain of life. Yes, with Yahweh, not with Yeshu. He has the words of life, not the New Testament. In your light we see light. Continue your loving kindness to those who know you, and your righteous to the upright in heart. Let not the foot of pride come upon me, and let not the hand of the ungodly drive me away. The workers of wickedness have fallen. They have been thrust down and cannot rise. So what I want to end on is this. Why do the righteous die? It's because they have fallen into a pattern of being with people that are not righteous. You see, Lot was saved by angels, but he was a fortunate one. In Deuteronomy 28, it talks about the curses that come from not keeping the commandments. And when you see this pattern, you realize that what happened with the Maccabees, with Eleazar, was because Jerusalem was not keeping the commandments. What do I mean? They were following the traditions of men. This is also why, Paul, he glorifies what? He glorifies affliction. There will be affliction and turmoil for every soul of man who works out evil, right? But he also says, who comforts us in all of our affliction. Isn't that interesting? I mean, Paul admits in Romans 2:9 that affliction comes to the evil, which is what Deuteronomy 28 teaches. But then he tells you, persevering in affliction, devoted to prayer, right? And this is the same thing, the idol tells you. He's out here healing people from their affliction. But he also says, when affliction or persecution arises because of the word, immediately they fall away. So you're healing some people from affliction, but telling others, expect affliction. Why does affliction come? Well, Deuteronomy 28 tells us why affliction comes. But it will be if you do not listen to the voice of Yahweh your God, to keep and do to all his commandments, his statutes, which I am commanding you today, meaning it's not a later oral Torah or traditions, all these curses will come upon you and overtake you. Cursed shall be you be in the city, cursed shall you be in the field. Cursed, isn't that interesting? Thank you, Father. I bet you know what I'm going to say after reading that, Brother Charles. Cursed shall you be in the city, and cursed shall you be in the field. Who talks about the field? Let him not who is in the field not turn back and take his mantle. Well, why is that? Well, he's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. But let's go on. Look at the next one. 2 men will be in the field, one taken and one left. And this is what they believe is their rapture. But the rapture is punishment, and that's what he's telling you. You shall be cursed in the field. Cursed shall you be in your basket and your kneading bowl. Cursed shall you be the offspring of your body and the produce of your ground, the increase of your herd and the young of your flock. Cursed shall you be when you come in, and cursed shall you be when you go out. And Yahweh will send upon you the curse, confusion, and rebuke in all that you send forth your hand to do, until you are destroyed, until you perish quickly. And here you go. Why do they die? Because they are cursed. Why are you afflicted? Because you're cursed. On the account of your evil of your deeds, because you have forsaken me. You've forsaken the Creator, Yahweh. Yahweh will make pestilence clean to you until he has consumed you from the land where you were entering to possess it. Yahweh will strike you with consumption and with fever, with inflammation, with fiery heat, with the sword and with a scorching wind and with mildew, and they will pursue you until you perish. And the heaven which is over your head shall be bronze, and the earth which is under you iron. Yahweh will make the rain of your land powder and dust, and from heaven it will come down on you until you are destroyed. Yahweh will cause you to be defeated before your enemies, and you will go out one way, against them, but you will flee 7 ways before them, and you'll become an example of terror to all the kingdoms of the earth. And your carcasses will be food to all the birds of the sky. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Isn't that the rapture again? Why does he keep talking about the rapture and the curses? Luke 17. I tell you, in that night there shall be two in a bed, and one taken and the other left. There'll be two women grinding together, and one will be taken, the other left. And they said to him, Where, Lord? And he said, Where the body is, there the eagles will be gathered together. Oh, the eagles are going to get me. Yeah, they're going to get you and eat you. That's what he's talking about. This is the curses for disobedience. As for you, Son of Man, thus says the Lord God, speak to the birds of every sort and all the beasts of the field. Assemble and come together from all sides of the sacrificial feast which I am preparing for you, a great sacrificial feast upon the mountains of Israel. And you shall eat the flesh and drink the blood. And isn't this interesting? Because in John 6:56, this is what he tells you to do, to eat his flesh and drink his blood, which means according to the Torah, according to the prophets, he is an enemy of Yahweh. And you, being a Gentile, are like a beast of the field, eating the enemy of Yahweh. Yeah, exactly. An offering outside the camp is not acceptable. And to the beast of the earth, and there will be no one to frighten them away. Yahweh will strike you with the boils of Egypt, and with tumors, and with scabs, and the itch. You cannot be healed. And this is one of the reasons I agree with Brother Jim. I think Job was written by the post-exilic Jews who were suffering these afflictions for their disobedience. And they were writing the book to explain why Yahweh would strike a righteous man with boils. But Yahweh clearly tells us in the Torah, you were struck with boils because of your unrighteousness, because you've forsaken Yahweh. Yahweh will strike you with madness and with blindness and with bewilderment of heart. And you will grope at noon as the blind man gropes in darkness, and you will not succeed in your ways. But you shall only be oppressed and robbed in all your days, with none to save you. You shall betroth the wife, but another man will violate her. Isn't that interesting, given that the New Testament idol tells you to go and castrate yourself, and Paul tells you, teaching the same thing, that even if you're married, you should not lay with your wife, as is the custom of a husband. You shall build your house, but you will not live in it. You shall plant a vineyard, but you will not use its fruit. And remember, he struck down the tree that did not bear fruit and caused it to be cursed. This is the curse of obeying a different God. Your ox shall be slaughtered before your eyes, but you will not eat of it. Your donkey shall be torn away from you, and you will not be returned. Your sheep shall be given to your enemies, and you will have none to save you. Your sons and your daughters shall be given to another people, while your eyes look on them and yearn for them all your days, but there will be nothing you can do. A people whom you do not know shall eat up the produce of your ground and all your labors, and you will never be anything but oppressed and crushed in all your days. And you shall be driven mad by the sight of what your eyes see. Absolutely, the thief in the night has taken over our wives. And here we have another example. Um, where's that verse at? Mark 3:21. Sorry, let's start a verse earlier. A house divided. Then Jesus went home, and once again a crowd gathered, so that he and his disciples could not even eat. When his family heard about this, they went out to take custody of him, saying, He is out of his mind. Yeah, that's interesting. Clearly, uh, That's why you don't see this verse in any of the other gospels or in Paul. And Jesus' family clearly didn't believe in the virgin birth, and they were calling him crazy. His own family said he is out of his mind. He was driven crazy, and it's not. This is one of the things that he has in common with our super apostle. In 2 Corinthians 12:16, be that as it may, I was not a burden to you, but crafty as I am, I caught you by trickery. Is Paul saying he's a crafty as a serpent? That's interesting. Yahweh will strike you on the knees and the legs with sores and boils, and from which you cannot be healed. From the sole of your foot to the top of your head, and Yahweh will lead you and bring your king, whom you set over you, to a nation which neither you or your fathers have known, and therefore you will serve other gods, wood and stone. And I'm going to get into this in another video. And you shall become an object of horror, a proverb, and a byword among all the people where Yahweh drives you. You shall bring out much seed to the field. You will gather little, and for the locust will consume it. You shall plant and cultivate vineyards, but you will neither drink of the wine nor the grapes, for the worm will devour them. And you shall have olive trees throughout your territory, but you will not anoint yourself with olive oil, for the olives will drop off. And you shall become the father of sons and daughters, but they will not be yours, for they will go into captivity. And the cricket shall possess all your trees and produce of your ground. The sojourners among you will rise above you higher and higher, but you will go down lower and lower. And he shall lend to you, but you will not lend to him. He shall be the head, and you will be the tail. So all these curses will come on you, pursue you, overtake you until you are destroyed, because you would not listen to the voice of Yahweh your God to keep his commandments, his statutes, which he commanded you. And this is key. Why did they become afflicted? Why did they die? It's because they did not listen to Yahweh. That's a possibility, brother, that the thorn in his flesh was boils and skin issues. I think it was also related to the blindness that wasn't healed. And he talks about that in Galatians 4. This trial in his body, right? What was it? Well, he talks about it up here. Where was that? Plucking out their eyes. Yeah, 4:15. Where then is this sense of blessing? For I testify to you that if possible, you would have plucked your eyes out for me and given them to me. But why are they plucking their eyes out and giving them to Paul? It's because he was still blind. The tale in Acts 9 didn't happen. He wasn't healed of his blindness because he was cursed. All right, thank you, Father, for this blessed study. Let us continue that we